Right.
Chicago, the Chicago area, and it's the Midwest.
Which city it is?
Chicago?
Chicago. Excellent. I was a big fan of Chicago Bulls.
Oh, yeah.
When our very own Tony Kukoc played alongside Scottie Pippen and Michael Jordan.
Oh, yeah, he was great.
It was amazing. There was a recently series on Netflix called The Last Dance.
Right.
Yes, wasn't it great?
Covered that period, and I loved it because as it happened, my mom spent 25 years living in North Palm Beach in Florida, and I would have gone to visit very frequently for a month or two at the time back in the 90s, and loved watching the games. It was fantastic. I also traveled across the United States very extensively. I've been to California and Nevada and
Tony Kukoc lives in my area.
he's actually from
He lives in the north suburbs of
So I
Chicago.
went to the bottom where it says no video, and then I went up top.
What brought your mother to United States?
You shouldn't have to do that.
She had some family, and then when the old federal state of Yugoslavia was disintegrating, she was with the family that summer, and it was almost impossible to come back. So she applied to stay on the grounds that the city was surrounded under bombardment, and she was given a work permit and the green card. Eventually, she became the citizen of the U.S.
Oh.
So she spent a good part of her life in Florida. In a sense, she's a true Floridian, and one of the things that she delights me with on a special occasions is a really well-made key lime pie, which was a Florida special, and I love it. So
we all love it.
There are only 10 of us.
Yeah,
So
I truly enjoyed that. So that's wonderful.
oh, look at this.
What's your
Matzah.
situation like at the moment with the coronavirus? Are you still having restrictions in your daily life routines that we all experience?
There's still restrictions. A lot of people, though, are starting to get vaccinated, with Moderna, Pfizer, but they're starting to loosen up a little bit in terms of some of the activities. So, yeah, it's still got, in our state of Illinois, we still have about 2,000 cases a day. So it's still not going, it's not going away.
Right.
But
How
about in Croatia?
Well, it depends on which region you're looking at. Here in Croatia, we're a small country. We have population just around 4 million people. Some regions are doing better than the others. Dubrovnik County, for the most part, since the pandemic started, was doing pretty well. But it appears that we're not doing so well at the moment. We're among the worst by new cases in the country in the past couple of weeks. So it was all going well, and then I think people started losing patience before it was supposed to, happen. And now we're having to experience stricter lockdowns again, although we are under some kind of a lockdown and restricted restrictions that for almost a year now. I remember this starting in 12th of March for us last year. It was, we took it very seriously because we are part of our country is bordering Italy. And if you do remember, the first kind of European hotspot for coronavirus was in northern Italy. So it was very close to home. And that sort of made us take it very, very seriously from the outset.
Getting to next year, I guess it's going to be stiffer.
Well, hello to everybody that's just joining us. I'm Michael. I'm the guide in Dubrovnik, so welcome. And once we're all gathered, our tour and sightseeing of this beautiful medieval city will start.
Okay.
It's going to be on.
The other one. The other one.
I'm gonna, it's probably if everybody could put themselves on speaker view, then we'll get a bigger picture, right? If you want to try
I better
speaker
put my
view.
hearing aid. Nah,
Yeah, put the hearing aid.
Okay.
If you got,
Excellent.
put it on speaker view, you'll get a big picture of Michael,
Mhm.
won't we?
If you press the icon of me at the bottom makes it the you got me on the main screen if you press on my picture there. So if you want to
Okay.
do that first to make sure.
Right, we're using Zoom. So I think we can get started now. Some
Brilliant.
latecomers, but I want to welcome Michael and everybody to this tour of Dubrovnik. Michael is live on site. I'm gonna mute everybody, and he'll take some questions.
At the end of the tour,
At the end of
this
the
is
tour.
what we normally do. So thank you, Joel. It's a privilege for me to be able to do what I love the most, and that is to share the beautiful city where I live in. It is a very special place. It has 1,500 years of history, and during those 1,500 years, Dubrovnikers achieved some amazing things that we'll learn about during this tour. We're going to view the old city. I'm just standing on the towards the western entrance of the old town. The time here is that the day is just coming to a closure. The sun is setting. So I'm going to now turn the camera to the other side so that you see what I see in front of me. And then I'm going to rejoin with you. You'll see me again at the end of the tour when I'll take questions. So I'm just going to switch the camera to the other side now. And we'll see the part of the walls washed in the sunshine. It's actually setting down into the sea on our western side. And you see the scenery here is quite spectacular. This is a fort of St. Lawrence's that we're looking at. This was built in the 11th century, by which time Dubrovnik, which was founded in the 6th century, has become kind of a very important commercial powerhouse of the medieval Mediterranean. And so this community became very prosperous, very well connected with the world. And the St. Lawrence's fort was built to kind of protect the thriving and growing merchant community, which was very, very successful. Geographically, Dubrovnik is in the southernmost part of the Croatian Adriatic. We're kind of at the moment surrounded by borders because you cannot leave Dubrovnik and step into other parts of Croatia without having to cross the border somewhere, which is being overcome by building a big bridge across the bay. So from the next year, we will be kind of connected to other parts of the land. We're surrounded by, in the southern side, by Montenegro and then Bosnia and Herzegovina. So Dubrovnik is kind of right in the middle of where the Eastern and Western cultures will meet. And this is a Roman Catholic community from its foundations. We see this big cliff that is awash in the sun there, and this is the cliff where the first settlement was built back in the 6th century. The Dubrovnikers were very keen merchants. They were brilliant naval architects and seafarers. And they had a natural kind of knack for diplomacy and developing commercial routes. So the neighborhood that I'm standing in right here, just behind around the 10th century, and this little neighborhood here just outside and by the below the St. Lawrence's fort up there is called Kolorina, which probably answers the question. When you think about the word Kolorina, there is clearly a word there that we understand. That's the word collar. So Dubrovnikers' big industry, big success was the wool textile industry, which grows by the 10th century to an enormous scale. And this area is where they dyed the textile. And this is why it's called Kolorina. arena. This is where the coloring would have been applied to the textile. This is the St. George's Church here. Now, St. George is a saint protector of England, as you may know. And it is no coincidence that of all places in the city, we have St. George's Church right in the Colorina, the location. The Dubrovnik merchants did not have a wool per se to buy in the nearby areas. This actually was quite an undertaking. The Dubrovnikers sailed to Southampton, their ships loaded with olive oil and wine, and they would come back with something called kersey. And kersey was the finest English wool at the time, named after a village in England in an area called Suffolk. And this is a village of Kerseys from where the finest English wools would be found. There were three types of cloths back in the day. There was a rough cloth, which was kind of really, as the name says, not really too pleasant to wear. And then there is the straight cloth, which was kind of a little bit rougher than today's jeans. And there was kersey, which was the finest wools. So the Dubrovnikers exchanged something that to this very day is very of highest quality, and that is the olive oil and wine. So the tradition of winemaking and olive oil in Dubrovnik is older than 1,000 years. And to this very day, when you come to the Dubrovnik region, it is essential that you indulge your senses in some fine wines that are locally made and olive oil. The Dubrovnikers are good merchants. They actually, one of the things that we're most proud about as a region is two things. One of them is the fact that there was a Republic of Dubrovnik. We kind of created and maintained our own state, a very successful endeavor that lasted from 14th to the 19th century. So Dubrovnik is a republic. It's a kind of a country on its own, and it lasts in that state for 450 years exactly. So Dubrovnik is pronounced a state in the year 1358 and becomes a really important and major player in medieval commerce of the old world Mediterranean. Its biggest adversary in trade were the Venetians. Its at one point biggest danger to the integrity and safety of the Republic was the, at one point in the late 15th century, Ottoman Empire. But the heritage we have that I mentioned we're most proud about is best reflected in the nickname that we have as people of this city. They call us Gospari. Gospari in translation means gentleman. And this is exactly the kind of attitude and kind of the way that they dealt in business and with people that earned them this nickname. The Dubrovnikers were very proud to provide their customers with value and charge them going reasonable market prices, and always make sure that the quality of their goods and services were superior. And this actually growth, it was a generic, organic growth of business that created one of the most powerful, wealthiest, and successful entities of medieval period Mediterranean. We're on the Western Plateau. This is where, in most cases, you will be arriving into the city. So this is called Pile. Pile kind of links in with the name Colorina because Pile was a name for a wool comb. So when you comb the wool, this big thing that they called Pile. So clearly, this where in modern times the buses arrive and this is where most public transport, there's a local bus there. It makes a U-turn there. It goes back up. This road is just one way coming this way. This was one of the first hotels in the city from the 19th century as well. And just adjusting to that, the biggest building that we're looking at is Dubrovnik Imperial Hilton Hotel. It's one of the closest hotels. It is the closest hotel actually to stay if you really want a short stay and be just by the entrance to the city walls. It's eerily empty. This is the pandemic. This is the time when our summer season comes to effect. This is a city that has 40,000 people, and we have more than 2 million visitors a year. And it would have all kicked off by now. The big cruise ships, the aircraft, it would all be landing, and many aircraft a day. This would have been buzzing by now. We kind of have season that starts beginning of March with large numbers of tourists, and it kind of quiets down in November. So between this period, we are very lively. Of course, none of that happened in the last year. We maybe had about 20% of usual numbers that visited the city. So we've been, as the whole world, significantly affected by the pandemic. This fountain here that we're looking at was placed in the year 1900. There's a story I love about it, and that's that this was a gift by two brothers, Nicholas and Anton, two brothers that from local family that immigrated to the United States in the latter part of the 19th century. We're talking maybe 1870s or 1880s. And they found success and created wealth, and it was customary to actually give a gift back to the community that you arrived from. But what I find very interesting is the last name of Nicholas and Anton. Now have a look at there. This fountain was a gift by Nico and Anton Ammerling. That's the last name. So Anton and Nico, but the last name is telling. I guess you will know this, but when many people from the world, it was a big influx of immigration into the United States from Europe, particularly in the late 19th century. The immigrants from Europe and Eastern Europe would have come in by their thousands every day, and they would have had a local names that Clerk and the Ellis Island would have found difficult to note sometimes. The local names can be sometimes very hard to even pronounce or make sense of in English. In the case where Clerk could not really successfully figure out the name, and there were so many thousands of arrivals, they would just give them the name. And in this case, it was Ammerling, something like, oh, they came to America, they're Ammerlings. So this tells also a story which many families or ancestors of generations of Americans would have experienced at the arrival to the country. We're entering into the old city wall. The old town is entirely enclosed in the set of walls and forts. This was the center of a republic. The Dubrovnik Republic was not just the old town within the walls. Eventually, when the republic was founded, it had somewhat of an expansion. It reaches its full territory by the early 15th century, and it's the size of a state of Rhode Island. It's very tiny, comparable to the square mileage that you will find in the state of Rhode Island. Quite eerie how empty this is. By now, we would have dividing ropes here in the middle. So right down the middle, because of the such a large number of visitors we have, this gate was not unusually a spot of bottleneck effect. And it would be like you can't go in, you can't go out. Eventually requiring the dividers right down the middle so that one way you walk in and the other way you come out. So it's been years since we have actually seen it like this. It started to be a regular occurrence at kind of a beginning of the 21st century, about 20 years ago, when all of a sudden we've seen massive cruise ships call in the port, bringing 3,000-4,000 guests at once. So you have 2 or 3 of these cruise ships in addition to dozens of beautiful hotels and villas and apartments. And we became somewhat victims of our own success. These walls stretch an entire circle around the old town. They would have provided amazing a kind of level of safety to all the inhabitants. And it was really a thriving community. There were artists and musicians and poets and businessmen. And this was a republic which was very well run, as we will discover its social structure and political structure relating to the palaces that we're going to see inside. You can walk all around the walls up there. It will take you about 2 hours, and they will make a circle in distance of about 1.5 miles. So that's the length of walk that you have. In medieval times, there used to be a moat surrounding the city, the walls all around it. Now we have the sea on the southern side to our right hand there, and the Fort Bockard that we actually saw from where we started from the Colovina Harbor. The bridge would have been lifted up in medieval times and the gates would be closed. And who greets us right at the top of this entrance is a patron saint of Dubrovnik. His name is Saint Blaise, a Christian martyr who lived in the 3rd century Armenia. The year when Dubrovnikers settled for their patron saint is 972. And he's, among other things, a patron of textile workers. And this was a thriving textile business community. So naturally, when they were forming their identity, in addition to the coat of arms and flag, for a Catholic entity, a patron saint was essential, such as in Venice, we have Saint Marco. The safety of its inhabitants is enhanced that when you enter into the city, you don't actually enter into the city. You enter into kind of a lobby area, which is an additional kind of buffer zone, just in case some hostile entity manages to overcome this gate. You see the mechanism that was used for lifting the bridge up. We have Baptist here and they play very nice music like flamenco. And this is the lobby area. So what happens here is, just in case that enemy entity somehow manages to overcome that, they're not really into ransacking the city immediately. They're kind of in the lobby area when there's another gate. There's a big wall here, and there is another gate down there, which in case of breaching the first gate, this gate below would have been boarded up and secured. And then any enemy forces would have been stuck in this area with Dubrovnik army manning the walls above. And it would not really be a very favorable strategic position for any attackers to find themselves in. It's interesting to note when we speak about violation of the gate, such thing has never happened in the history of Dubrovnik. There were attempts by the Saracens in the 10th century. There were challenges that for the most part Dubrovnik did not handle militarily, but diplomatically. Dubrovnik merchants wisely kept themselves neutral, and in spite of being a Catholic, take sides. They grew an enormous size of merchant navy, so their cargo fleet is one of the largest in Europe. And as such, they can be called upon to deliver transport services to both people and goods to any party that would require. And they kind of were a little Singapore of modern times, or Switzerland of ancient times, if you like. To make sense in perspective of actually the city that we're covering, when you enter into this lobby area, there is a map of the city there. The layout that we see here is a typical Roman urban street formula, streets and avenues. This is the formula of the old Romans, and this is how Dubrovnik is designed. So we've actually entered here. We were by this little pier when we just started. There's a St. Lawrence's Fort. There's a little pier where our tour started. We walked through the Colorina, got to Pilla, and we're now entering into the city. And this is, since 13th century, the layout has been unchanged, even though there was a lot of challenges that we faced in those 900 years since the city has been laid out as we see it now. Dubrovnik enjoys recognition by UNESCO as the city inscribed into the World Heritage List since 1979. And that would have meant, as part of saving the heritage, that any military installations or army presence is strictly forbidden within a 10-mile radius of the city, as to avoid making city a target in case of a conflict. The early 90s bring a big challenge when federal state of Yugoslavia, which was made out of 6 republics, decides to go its own way. Every country goes its own way, but not in a peaceful manner. Unfortunately, Dubrovnik is thus at the receiving end of an enormous bombardment back in 1991 and 92. And this is the map of damages that Dubrovnik sustained in this period. And you can see there's icons representing different things, little triangles and dots and red highlighted areas. And this is the key. So we see here, what does that mean? It was heartbreaking. I have to say it was one of the most difficult parts of my life. I was in my early 20s at the time, and it was heartbreaking to see this beautiful city on an end of such a violent treatment. we had to replace more than 1 million roof tiles inside the old town. But we have a great restoration crew, and to this day, back in the 90s, we took a latter part of the 90s repairing and restoring, and normality kind of in full came back in about 1996 with large tourist numbers returning to Dubrovnik, which was also before this conflict a very popular tourist destination, in larger numbers by 1998. As we come to this gate here, again, we are greeted by patron saint, Saint Blaise, and it's all limestone. There's a quarry. If you wonder what material it is, it's a limestone. Through here, we see a Gothic fountain built in 1442. And in front of us is going to be one of the most beautiful streets in the world. It's all pedestrian. It's an adventure coming in here, and it's such a peaceful and beautiful city. And you can enjoy magnificent architecture as you see. But look at that street. This is 1,000 feet long. We call it Stradun, which means the Italian word is strada for street. Official name of it is plaza. And when we walk in, we really walk back in time. And we're going to start seeing beautiful architecture, Renaissance and Gothic and Baroque, and a lot of stories related to what we are seeing. So we're going to start with this fountain, a very interesting project. Dubrovnik declares independence as a city-state in 1358. Under then, Venetians tried to rule Dubrovnik on few occasions, for some periods successfully, greatly limiting the potential of Dubrovnik undertakings and entrepreneurial ambitions. But when Dubrovnik manages to strike key alliances and get one of the ruling kings in Europe, the Hungarian king, to be a patron of newly born state, Dubrovnikers have free hand to build commerce as and when they see fit. And this really brings explosion of developments in the city at that time. And one of the services that they bring is the running water for the citizens. At the time, there was 5,000 people living within the walls. And the water was through the system of wells that collected rainfall, but there was also need for more water, which was brought from the sources by ships in big containers. And but that wasn't sufficient for a city that was on its way to such success and development. In 1436, the public coffers are full, and which means things are going very well. And Dubrovnik undertakes to build fountains. There was 2 fountains built at the time, and they are both called the large and small Onofrio fountain, after its builder, Onofrio della Cava, one of the leading architects and engineers of the 15th century. The real feat is that Onofrio built an aqueduct. The background, you see, through this little opening is there's a big hill just behind. And the terrain is very rocky and mountainous at the back, and the river is 8 miles away. So Onofrio's real task, which took about 5 years, is to build a successful line of aqueducts that will direct and drive the water through very uneven terrain and eventually deliver it to the citizens of Dubrovnik. This happens, and this fountain was opened in 1442. So it took about 6 years from the planning and drawing to actually for the water to start flowing here. Just opposite the Onofrio's large fountain is one of the most beautiful examples of Renaissance architecture in Dubrovnik. This is the Church of Holy Savior. This was the votive church. This was built in 1525. And this followed a series of a very mild but consistent earthquakes through the beginning of the 16th century. We live on a fault line. The very last earthquake that we all felt was 4.3, and it happened only last week. But they don't happen weekly, but they do happen at least once every year or two. So we are used to living with this. But of course, the earlier generations of Dubrovnikers, it would have been the same case. But they believe that kind of making a church and vow to heavens and dedicating this church to stop the earthquakes is going to do the trick. It's going to appease the powers that be in the sky to actually stop shaking the ground, because these events were attributed to the divine will. And as such, Church of the Holy Savior is completed in 1525. The shape of the city that we will be looking at for the most churches and cathedrals down the road is Baroque, which is kind of strange. Baroque is the architecture of a late 17th, early 18th century, and it's a dominant style of build in the city. But the city is so prosperous and built much, much before, so there has to be a reason. And the reason happens back in the year 1667, when Dubrovnik is devastated by a massive earthquake, destroying more than 70% of the buildings in the city at the time. And when the rebuilding effort was taking place, the unique shape of the city was saved in rebuilding, but the churches were built in the style of the day, and thus Baroque dominates, but only because other styles were badly damaged or destroyed in the year 1667. To give you a scale of this earthquake, it took 65 years to get the city back up on its feet. So people of Dubrovnik would have seen many challenges through generations. This is the entrance to the Franciscan monastery. This big structure that we're looking at is built back in the Gothic times, and that is the year 1317. The public lights just came out, so we have beautiful atmosphere now, and the city is pretty empty to what normally it should be. Franciscan monastery, when you visit, there's a lovely courtyard inside. They've been built in 1317, and very same year would have opened the pharmacy inside. Franciscans were the monks who looked after the well-being of people, particularly those in need, the ill, the elderly, the poor. This is the Franciscan kind of calling. And the pharmacy that you walk through that little alleyway, amazingly never ceased servicing clients since then. Only it was obviously upgraded a space inside. The last time the pharmacy was kind of renovated was before the First World War, and it still offers, you know, services as a pharmacy. So it has been consistently running for more than 700 years in the same location. And there is a church, big, beautiful church, and 3 towers will be in the sky. One is the Franciscan that we see here. The other one is at the very bottom of the street we're going to come closer to is the clock tower, and another one which belongs to the Dominican monastery. I'm going to put my mask on because masks are mandatory indoors. I'm going to take you through the church of the Franciscans here. So forgive the camera movements for the moment. It's my hands in motion to applying the mask on my face there. Right, I'm now ready to enter into the Franciscan church. I may have to be quiet without much commentary inside because there may be people at prayer, but this is a beautiful experience to see some of the interiors. I love an opportunity to be able to show you that. So I'm going to go pretty quiet now. Well, as it happens, there's nobody in sight, so we have it all to ourselves, but look at that. So this is the 14th century Gothic church. Sometimes it is used to have concerts in here. Dubrovnik has a symphony orchestra. This is a city of arts and culture. It always has been. I'll tell you some great performances that took place in our city and festivals that we have. Sometimes I have very fond memories from here. My late grandfather played bassoon, and very often they would play where the altar is. And so the Franciscans will host the classical music concerts. There's a big organ just on the upper part. It's a big organ that occasionally plays in the high ceiling. This church was damaged as well. The roof was damaged in the bombardment of the 1990s. It was heartbreaking to experience that period. This beautiful balcony is one of the oldest parts of the church, which has been there since the very construction place. It's a Gothic
Michael, we lost the picture.
Oh, sorry.
Oh,
Let me see
you
where I
got
can.
it. Now it's fine. Now you got it.
You got it? Okay. Sorry. There may have been a little signal issue, although I've done this before and it never was a problem. So let me know, please, whether the sound or picture,
No, this
make sure. Is it good?
Yes, it's good.
Perfect. So sometimes at this stage, the altar is moved and the Dubrovnik Orchestra will perform concerts. So Franciscans in, there's still Franciscan monks. There's an open courtyard. You can visit the museum with the location of the very first pharmacy dating back to the early 14th century. So have a look back at this beautiful building interior. It's quite amazing, and sometimes, in spite of all the overcrowding we can experience, the monasteries and churches will provide you with solace, with place for reflection and peace. Regardless, but sometimes you just open this door and you come out back on the street, which normally can be overwhelmed with people. The Stradon is the place of the social moment. It's full of cafes that are normally open. Now we're still under restrictions, so restaurants, cafes, cinemas, concerts are still not fully allowed. And but Stradon, the old town, I'm half English. My father is English. I was born in London, and we came back. I came as a child here in 1973, and we stayed here. And my first grade was back in 1975, and my school was right here inside the walls. And back in the day, there was 4,500 locals living inside the old town. Today, that number is below 1,000. And the largest number of migrations of people from the old town took place back in the beginning of this, back in like 2005, 6, 7, 8, and 9. Over those 4 years, we've become so busy, so crowded that just trying to run a normal life, take your kids to kindergarten and school became a big, tall order, big task. And it was very crowded. And people also started receiving crazy offers for the square footage. The square foot almost reached $900 at one point. And people just said, well, I can't deal with this overcrowding. It's okay. People, when they come on holiday, they need fun and music, and bars are open till late at night and so on. And so a lot of them sold out. And you can see that as well, sometimes regardless of the pandemic, with the local people, when they come onto the streets of the old town outside of the season, can see a significantly lesser scale of local life that would have been there in the last century. And besides, people now have Messenger and various ways to actually exchange, social moments. And it used to be that when I was growing up as a high school kid, every day after school, you come to Stradon. Everybody meets everybody on Stradon. And that was the old tradition. And it was beautiful. And I'm not saying these times were better, but somehow there was a more human contact then. We all kind of felt more closer to each other in a certain way. So that's what the Stradon to this day, for me, remains a place of meeting people, social gathering. We have a number of festivals in the city. When you come to Dubrovnik, you can indulge in great gastronomy, but also arts and culture. Probably, or most surely, the best known festival is the Dubrovnik Summer Festival. It starts in 10th of July every year. It's been running since late 40s, and it lasts for 6 weeks. It goes on 10th of July to the 25th of August. And over decades, it actually had world star performers. We had Herbert von Karajan directing, Berlin Philharmonic Orchestra. We had Tom Jones back in 2019 playing out on the big stage here on the street. We had names like Brian Ferry and Miles Davis. We had Daniel Day-Lewis play Hamlet on the St. Lawrence's fort. If you remember at the beginning, the fort that was providing the safety and defenses on the western side. There's a level of terraces on the fort, and we have theater there. So it is amazing. It's kind of very pulsating and very much a living city. I'm going to take just a detour to show you some of the side streets here. Actually, the layout when we're here on the main street is the bottom of like a shelf that goes upward. If you remember that cliff right at the beginning of the tour where we were facing, that would be on our right, and it would go steps up. But also to the wall on the northern side, there would be quite a few steps up to exit the city. So there's a lot of steps when you're in the old town, which is good for your cardiovascular health. And on the side here, there's a few residential entrances. But for example, in a normal day, there's a couple of bars. There's a restaurant here. There's a kind of a light jazz music coming out, or classical and pop music. So it gets very, very lively. Even now, we would see signs of life, and we actually don't right now. But hopefully, we'll overcome this. Dubrovnik had its challenges in the past. We were the people that, as a republic, had one of the first quarantines in the world back in late 1300s, because this was the community of merchants and that traveled long and far away, not just England. Dubrovnik would have a trading relationship with South Africa and Scandinavia, and back in 1546, there was a St. Blasius church built in northern Goa in India, and to actually service the needs of a Dubrovnik merchant colony there. So it's amazing they would have traveled the world, but one of the real dangers would have been to actually come back with a plague or so. So they had one of the quarantines because it was a place where it welcomed people from all over the world, just like today in modern times. That was the case in medieval times. This street runs the length of the main street. There are two streets. Either side of the main street, there's a street that runs the entire length. At the moment, the cafe that is open cannot let you in. You can order a takeaway coffee. So the people that run cafes found themselves, without revenue, and the rents are there, and it's the state has tried. The government has tried to give them an opportunity at least to sell over the counter hot drinks and coffees. So you can buy a coffee like that, but you can't sit, or you cannot go inside the establishment. The Prieko Street is one restaurant after another. So there's a restaurant there. There's a restaurant there. It's one of the largest outdoor places to dine in the city, and we have Michelin-starred restaurant. Our cuisine is Mediterranean, very light, a lot of olive oil, seafood. We have some organic producers of fruits and veggies in the local area. So this is really a lovely street in the summertime. It is full of tables and chairs, and sort of you can see the buzz, you can feel the buzz of people and buzz of life. So that's the Prieko Street. It's very beautiful and charming. Of the two entrances, we started on the western entrance. Our tour will end on the eastern entrance of the city. At the beginning of the 20th century, there was opening of a side entrance in the walls. So you actually have three ways of entering or exiting the old town. And there's a mixture of architecture. And the mixture of architecture is down to sometimes the patch-up work after the earthquake of 1667. So there were times when you had to add one style of architecture onto another. So there are buildings, say, for example, with Romanesque detail. Look at that. This is the detail of the 9th and 10th century here. So this building would have been affected and rocked, but the parts of it would have been saved. So quite interesting that, there's a story that's told in detail of architecture, and you can certainly tell, well, something big happened here to actually leave traces of one period and then the building of a more modern style of the house right above. And that up there would be, if you see a little sort of light area right at the top of the street, is where this side entrance to the city would be. So this is really, really a very much alive view. We're going to take down the stroll through another side street here and take you to the back to the main street. Dubrovnik was a very cosmopolitan, progressive, open merchant community. Back in the 15th century, when Spain had the Inquisition and its Jewish community was expelled, Dubrovnikers, as a republic, they opened up their arms and welcomed some of the refugees from this part of the from Pyrenees Peninsula, from Spain. And this was the part of the Jewish ghetto here. And this is also the building up there. The entrance is from the other side, when there is the third oldest synagogue of Europe. So it was a progressive community. When at one part of the world you have the expulsion, here you have people welcoming. And this Jewish community was the first non-Catholic that were invited to live inside the walls. So that tells you about, you know, how Dubrovnikers had, what kind of worldview they would have hold. And it was always been something, part of being a Gothfather or a Dubrovniker that makes one proud of their history. We came closer there to the clock tower, so part of the main street, we took a walk on the side street. Equally, to that side, there's a street that runs the entire length of the main street. So what a beautiful view there. This is probably the nicest hours, or the beautiful blue. Look at that. What a beautiful color, and what a beautiful picture that is. Quite a good hour, actually, to do a tour. And part of the benefit of not having crowds, you can enjoy access, even by this video now live. This is an unparalleled access to, you know, viewing the city as it is. You know, it would be very hard in normal circumstances to see it as we see it now. The clock tower is built shortly after the Onofrio finished his work on the fountain, and the year is 1444. Bronze soldiers right atop of the tower, and there's a big bell, and they will ring the hour. So what time it is. And this square here is the square outside of the St. Blaise's Church. This is the St. Blaise's Church. It is a Baroque building. There was a Gothic building, Gothic Church of St. Blaise, which collapsed in the earthquake of 1667. And this was rebuilt about 300 years ago, so at the beginning of the 18th century. One of the best preserved pieces of architecture unaffected by the big earthquake is the Sponza Palace. Sponza Palace is the most beautiful example of Gothic architecture left in the city. This was built in 1498, so the late 15th century, and we can see distinct pointed windows and shapes that represent the Gothic period. This was one of the buildings owned by the state of Dubrovnik, and this was the customs and taxmen and customs. So this is the building where there was customs. Also, the upper floor would have served as a school. Dubrovnikers paid a lot of attention to educating future diplomats and merchants. What amazing that in the 16th century, the Republic of Dubrovnik has 55 consular offices around the world. And their task is to advance commercial agreements and build links between nations and trade among nations. So Dubrovnikers was very much that force that kind of brought people together and in business and trade. The gates will have a coat of arms of Dubrovnik, and there's a word below the coat of arms that says Dogana, which means customs in Latin. Inside, there's an open courtyard. And when you come to work, if you worked in the tax office, customs office of Dubrovnik back in the day, when this was actively functioning, there's a message that would greet you inside on an archway, written on a similar archway like this, and it would say, as you are weighing those goods, God is weighing you. It means do it right, appropriate what's right and apply the right level of taxation on the goods that are imported. The Church of St. Blaise is located centrally, which also tells us a story of how Dubrovnik related to, even though being a Catholic entity, related to Vatican and the Catholic Church altogether. Because Republic of Dubrovnik is one entity, and the even though it was important to affirm its identity in Catholicism, they did not take the lead of Catholic Church in every aspect. And one of the ways to show who's the boss, even though this is a church, this belongs and it's dedicated to the patron saint of this community, and it occupies central position. The cathedral is there at the back, symbolically telling you the order of things in this community is the Republic and its interests are very first, and we affirm the Catholic identity, but the cathedral is at the back. So yes, the Dubrovnikers acknowledge, but they put things in order and show you clearly, whose interests they hold closest to heart. And this would have been the building of the Senate. Now we'll see the political structure of the city of the Republic was amazing, which enabled it to last for 450 years without one uprising of people against the government. So that's quite amazing. So they must have been doing something right. And we'll find about that in a moment. Before then, I want to show you the small Onofria fountain. It's a Gothic piece of architecture. And it was built at the same time in the early 1440s when the large fountain was built. And because the street is 1,000 feet long, they did not want to disadvantage people living, say, this street to have the longest way down the street to go carry the water home. You carry the water back home for your own needs in a bucket back then. So to make sure that, on the length of the street, the people have access on either side. They always look for balance. This is what makes them earn their name, Gospodari. We'll go by the Senate in a moment, but we're celebrating 110 years of Croatian chocolate maker. So 110 years of a company called Crush here. And when you're in Dubrovnik, this is also an entrance to the cinema. We have numerous cinemas in the city. This entrance leads us to one of the cinemas inside the old town. But what do Crush do? Crush do chocolates. So there it is. You can see some of the Crush fine chocolate. So when you're in Dubrovnik, Bomboniera and Crush, this is something local that you want to try. So, when you're here or in Croatia, sample some of the fine Crush chocolates. 110 years of tradition, and they've been very, very popular staple in everybody's house, be it the cookies or chocolates. There's, as children, we would have known that as one of the first brands ever to learn about. So, and then you have the entrance to the cinema there. So this door would have gone, if it opens, no, it's locked. So there would be the tickets, your popcorn, and then up those steps and into the cinema hall. And then some of the cinema greats that actually visited or worked in Dubrovnik on filming. Danny DeVito there, you'll probably recognize. We have Ennio Morricone, which recently passed away and is deserving of all the spaghetti western hits and music. We have Peter Falk, the legendary Columbo, and Liam Neeson there. Sergio Leone and Francis Ford Coppola, Sophia Loren. Some of the greats that actually have seen Dubrovnik, they've spent some time here, and most often they were actually filming here in the city. This is a big backdrop for popular movies, and probably one of the most famous things that have been done in the recent history is the HBO's Game of Thrones, which put Dubrovnik in the center as the center of 7 kingdoms, and it was called King's Landing. And it has about 1 billion fans around the world, and we've seen in the last 5-6 years, hundreds of thousands of people from across the world coming to see the filming locations where their characters from this famous show that were filmed. This was the Senate, and unlike then, or rather just like then, I wanted to say, it is a city hall today. So we have flags up here. This is where the mayor's office is. The Senate of the Republic of Dubrovnik. Right adjacent to that, there is the theater named after the most famous writer we've ever had. Somebody's opening the door there. I'm gonna ask if we can peek into the theater. This is not a part of something that we can always have a luck with. I will ask because I think the theater is a beautiful spot, and if I have an opportunity to show you, I'm delighted to try, at least. So we're gonna try and go inside and see whether we can have a little peek if the lights are on. Halo, dobar večer. Je li vam upaljeno svjetlo da se može jedan mali, nije? Proba, je li? Imam goste u Chicago, utiho bi bez riječi, samo da mali jedan. Nikako, ok, dobro. A ne mogu sad mi je, znate što, uživo mi je tura, oni su na Skype-u. Ne mogu nikako, dobro, ok. I'm very sorry, but the theater troupe is in rehearsal, so we cannot go inside. But I'm going to send you some pictures on your link on YouTube, or rather on your either a YouTube recording of the theater, if I can find them, or a link to see what's inside. The beautiful 3 floors of golden leaf boxes. It's a theater built in 1800s, and it still serves as a place of performances, as theater and concerts. Fabia Beracassa, which may be the name you know or not, she's a heiress to Hearst Publishing Empire. The Citizen Kane movie was based on that. And she hired that theater for a wedding. She had a big wedding 5 years ago in Dubrovnik. And she flew in one of the major hip hop or rap music stars called Snoop Dogg. You may have heard of him. And he played actually in an ancient theater of Dubrovnik. So it was modern meets the old, and it was all very excited. Back in 2009, Tom Jones was playing just in this street here. The stage was just in front of the cathedral, and it was amazing. And I can tell you, he was bursting with energy, just like when he sang Delilah back in the 60s. So what an amazing act, I have to say. In his late 70s, and he still fully rocks. So this year, we were meant to have in the same location Andrea Bocelli, but unfortunately, pandemic, all is part of the summer festival in Dubrovnik. Unfortunately, it didn't happen this year. So theater and the city hall, sometimes we refer to the city hall as the house of opportune alliances and broken promises, which is what you get pretty much in politics anywhere in the world to some extent. Adjacent to the city hall, this palace is called the Rector's Palace. Rector is the title of the head of state. So the Dubrovnik Republic head of state is Rector. And this is where he lived, right adjacent to the Senate. Would anybody try and guess how long was the term of the Rector? It wasn't a lifetime position, quite contrary. Anybody wants to try and tell me how long a rector would sit in power in this palace?
20 years.
Any guesses are welcome. Go on. Any guesses? Well, I'll tell you without further guessing. 30 days, 1 month. 1 month. So when I said they must have been doing something right about running the society, they actually stipulated that a head of state position is an administrative one, and that senators aged 50 or older take turns, and you never get 2 months in a row. In fact, if you have been a head of state in July, you can't be so until January. At least 6 months have to pass between your 2 terms. But you could do many terms. But what it assured of the people is there was no nepotism. There was no one family that had it all. There was a spread of wealth. And Dubrovnik also was a meritocracy. And even though noble birth would give certain privilege, because it was a noble republic of noble nobility, Opportunity was there that if you could make it, that you could achieve a very wealthy and prosperous lifestyle, regardless of the status of your birth. And some of the most successful merchants of Dubrovnik, in fact, some of the wealthiest in history of the community, not born into the families of privilege. And part of the reason has that the power was seen as transitional and very, very frequently. So that they never get a chance for somebody to become bigger than the others and kind of stop the progress of the society by having to rule all by themselves. So that's remarkable. There's a beautiful museum inside the rector's palace, and you can see the rector's offices, you can see the artworks, and very often you can attend concerts inside. There's an open courtyard, and there is beautiful performances that that you can go and see inside. Late Sir Roger Moore, one of the most famous James Bond, would have recited poetry along with the classical music. Now, the vehicles are not normally allowed into the old town. But this is the fireman vehicle, and
well, we open at 10, but I would say 10:30 is fine. Okay. If you want to do it in the morning. Or
here. Dubrovnik is also, I'm sorry, I hear some speaking in the background. Can you mute yourself, please? If you want to speak in the background, that's great, but can you please mute yourself? Thank you. The art gallery here, Dubrovnik is, I'm an amateur artist, and Dubrovnik painters are known for painting beautiful colors. But I want to bring this to your attention, the name of this gallery. This gallery is an honorary gallery. It's a memorial house of Ronald Brown. Anybody knows who Ronald Brown was?
Wow.
You
well,
may remember.
No, I'm listening. Okay. I'm listening to a tour of Dubrovnik from the South Group. I'm down at Northwestern.
Ronald Brown was a Secretary of Commerce of the United States.
No big deal. But it's very interesting because I met with Dr. Levin. And I have, yeah, he took me within a week. And
Ronald Brown tragically died in a plane crash near Dubrovnik back in 1995. I'm very sorry, I can't carry the tour with so much talking in the background.
Sorry, Arnie Hoffman, please mute.
Shoulder procedure. She was very happy with it.
Arnie Hoffman, please mute.
Since Monday, so I'm beginning to think I don't care about him if they can't call for an appointment in 4 days.
Arnie Hoffman, please
even if you
mute
wanted me
yourself.
6 weeks from now, you could call back.
I don't know whether you can hear me along the chatting, but if you can, it's fine. I'll carry on, but it makes a little difficulty. Hopefully, you can hear what I'm saying. So we're entering into right now and exiting the walls for the time being. But the harbor area was a very.
So we said, no, you need to see a vascular person, and I probably will keep you in one night, and then you're going home.
Arnie
I
Hoffman,
said, oh, no
please
rehab. He
mute.
said, no, they don't do much rehab anymore. Certainly not inpatient, and you don't need a whole lot of outpatient rehab. The procedures have just gotten so much better. Oh, okay. But that's good to know. That is good to know. I like Whitehall. They were good. Right. Yeah.
Michael, I'm going to mute everybody.
Right. Well, and I also decided I'm not going to do.
Okay, now tell Michael, tell me.
Michael, unmute.
There he goes.
Are we the only ones in this picture still there?
All right, I'm back. I'm sorry. My hand is moving across the screen as by accident touched the mute button. My apology. So we have this lit building right across the bay. This was the earliest Florentine in Europe, built in late 1300s to service the need of many interactions and reduce the risk of epidemics and pandemics. Back in the day, bubonic plague was the largest threat. And that would have had 6 weeks incubation periods. So it was very dangerous. And if you knew a shipment comes from an area or a ship comes from an area affected by an outbreak, then all the arrivals sailing in from the destination affected would have to sit out 6 weeks in the incubation right outside the city where that lit building is. That is the Lazaretto. And we see here the fishermen's nets. So this is why it's called the Fisherman's Gate that we just came in through. This is the walls. You actually walk at St. John's Street, Fort, and you would have, when you do a wall tour, you walk all above there, and that's the gate we've entered into the harbor. And the walls carry on just above. And this here in front of us, the promenade that we're walking on, was added on in the late 1700s, because there are archways that we're going to pass by, and these archways were the naval arsenal of Dubrovnik, and this goes back, it's as old as the 8th century. This naval yard was founded 1300 years ago, and the archways actually would have had the sea coming in. So all this promenade that we're walking on now was actually added much later. So by original design, we have actually boats sailing into these archways. This is the naval yard. This is all redesigned now. But back in the day, actually, we'd be looking at ships being built here, maintenance, repairs of the ships. This is why these big archways are there. In modern times, this is called the Arsenal Restaurant, because it was the naval arsenal, and it'd be like the terrace with delicious food served. And hopefully when you make it to Dubrovnik outside of this pandemic, when this is all behind us in not too distant future, I hope, this is one of the great spots to actually dine on the terrace with beautiful views over the harbor and the walls, and it really is a special spot to enjoy. Part of the charm of Croatia and Dubrovnik is we do have so many islands of our coastline. The nearest island to Dubrovnik is called Island of Lokrum. And Lokrum is just 5 minutes sail away. And I thoroughly recommend visits to this island. It's a special reserve of forest vegetation. And you can enjoy your morning cappuccino or a macchiato or cafe latte in most amazing of surroundings, in manicured medieval gardens near a 13th century Benedictine monastery courtyard. And that's when you go to Island of Lokrum. There are beaches, you can have a swim, you can actually swim in a sea lake. There's right in the middle of the island, there's a lake, and you can have a quiet swim there if you like. So Island of Lokrum is a must when you come to the city. You can see by the clock tower that we're kind of on the other side of it now. And we go back through the Captain's Gate, because this was the harbor master's house back in the day. Harbor master's house was this. This is now one of the restaurants of the city with a terrace just on the other side. You'd have all the tables and chairs and live music. These guys play Dixieland music. They love New Orleans and Dixieland, the owners. So you'll have 3-4 live jazz musicians playing Dixieland standards here. And it's very jolly. This is a very, very jolly place to have a good snack, a little bite, and enjoy some great music and atmosphere in a normal circumstances. You notice everywhere there are gates. We make sure that St. Blaise is a guardian of the city. He's just up on the above. So as we head to the eastern gate towards the completion of our tour, I want to take us back to the main street to give you an idea of what we've just done. We did a little circle, and now we're going to view the main city, the main street, from its eastern side. So I came back from the harbor inside, and there's the main street again, but now I've approached it through the eastern gate. So this is the entrance, and what you see right here on the right-hand side is the Sponza Palace, the one that was the customs house. So just to give you the idea of the perspective, we actually did a circle. We headed from St. Blaise's Church towards the cathedral there, and took a left by the cathedral, went into the harbor, and this way we came back into the inside the walls again. The eastern approach to the city, it features a similar buffer zone like the western approach, only the alley is a bit longer. The walls are about 40 feet high, and the distinct feature you'll see across the walls anywhere are these holes that we see there. They've been designed to reduce the number of mosquitoes. And you may ask yourself, how do the walls How do the holes in the wall like this have anything to do with reducing the mosquitoes? How's that? Well, this is an old medieval way of actually encouraging swallows to live here and have nests. Swallows feed on mosquitoes, so obviously more swallows you have near you, less mosquitoes. And that's the whole medieval strategy of actually fighting the pest of mosquitoes, is opening these holes for the swallows to actually have nests. And an average swallow can go through 1,000 mosquitoes a night. So you can imagine it does help in a big way. This staircase leads us to the Dominican monastery. Now, Dominicans were the driving force behind the Inquisition. And nothing happened in Dubrovnik in that respect. There is some work on the facade of the monastery now, so it's all covered, but we see the tower that also has a bell. Dominicans in this community are remembered as patrons of arts and music, and their museum holds one of the largest medieval songbooks and collections of medieval music, and some of the finest works of medieval artists, both Dubrovnik and Italian. And this beautiful Gothic staircase has an interesting feature. These columns, they go up. Look how beautiful they are. Some of it's been restored here. But we have a feature that they are closed here. Any guesses as to why is this part closed and this part is open? Why is it just not open to the bottom? Nothing to do with water or overflow of water, if that's what you're thinking. Any guesses? Back in medieval days, not unlike today, if a lady walks up these steps, they take you in this direction. But if you're from down here, and this is the reason why this was done, pure morals. If a lady goes up in the skirt, this angle allows you to see below. And this is the entire reason why, for morals, these columns have actually been half closed. If anybody actually happened to have watched the Game of Thrones show, there was something called the Walk of Shame by Queen Cersei, and this is where angry crowds are throwing all kinds of things at this character in the show. The alleyway, then with the walls that are facing the harbor to the right, is taking us towards the exit of the city through its eastern gate. On the way, we have a beautiful staircase of a Gothic entrance to the Dominican church. Also a fantastic ambience inside, fantastic acoustics of this church, which was purposely designed, among other things, to support beautiful acoustic sound. So many concerts do take place in there. As you walk outside, you'll find a few more features in the city. One of the best restaurants in the city, and the restaurants where there's always a lot of paparazzi about, because many famous and celebrities from sports and entertainment very often like to dine in 360 restaurants. And this is a Michelin-starred restaurant. This is the entrance, and it actually overlooks the harbor. It actually overlooks the area where we just walked around. And we walked around the harbor down there, you know, the arsenal. And it actually has a terraces overlooking the harbor. And this is the a Michelin guide restaurant. So it is a superb experience in gastronomy. So you can actually treat your taste buds and senses in Dubrovnik, from arts and culture and music and fine performances. And we are proud to be Gospari to this day. So you will expect, you know, the best of everything when you come to this city. The part of the policy to have houses on this alleyway. Remember, this was the buffer zone. There's a big wall, huge wall there of the Dominican monastery. The wall on the other side, it's part of the buffer zone, just like on the western gate. So this house has happened a little later, and it's called the executioner's house. The reason why it's called is because the person who, back in medieval days, Dubrovnik had a penal code which, for hardest of crimes, featured the death penalty. And they feel it was bad luck. They were superstitious. They thought it was bad luck to live next door to the executioner, the person that does the job, as if somehow you're going to end up his client if you're his neighbor. So that superstition went so far that it caused the problem. Every person that took a job could no longer live where they have been living. Unless they finish with the job, they can go back to living normally as long as they're not the executioner anymore. So this house was built for executioner and his family to actually live. They have no neighbors. This is just a chapel here and a big wall of a Dominican monastery there. And to this day, this is something about this house that you get penalized or punishment from. Today, let's say the karma remains, but on a much lesser scale. This is the communal offices, communal inspectors' offices. And when you get your parking ticket, these guys from here have handed it out. So to this day, it's no longer about capital punishment, but punishment it is, and it will come to you from here. As we exit here, this by end of 1400s is the end of the city. But then as the Ottoman Empire posed a threat at the time to the Dubrovnik Republic, as their conquest in the late 15th century was brutal and fast, it was felt that this was too weak, as not strong enough to defend the city. So another fort, Fort Revelin, was built in the late 15th century. But when you're coming there, this is the map of the city that will greet you just the same. This time, it's upside down to comparison to what we had at the start. So to recap, we started by the St. Lawrence's here and entered the city here. We've gone past the large fountain and the Church of the Holy Savior. We've entered here into the Franciscan Church and walked the main street and then switched to one of the side streets where we walked a little bit of Pieko Street, came down to the bottom. Then we're here by the Sponza Palace, the cathedral. We went out in the harbor this way, walked around here and came back this way. So by Sponza Palace again. Now we're on the exits to the city and by Revelin Fort. And this is where we're going to exit the city. So this gives you in perspective as to what we covered. Dubrovnikers were concerned about the Ottoman attack, but being a very good diplomats, they managed like a number of deals with the Ottomans. And the Ottomans leave them alone. They pay them a certain racket to the Sultan every year. But ultimately, this beautiful fort that was built purposely to defend against the potential Ottoman attack never served its purpose until early 90s when the Yugoslavia disintegrated and when Dubrovnik was exposed to such vile treatment and bombardment that we had in the early 90s. Then the people living in the old town found shelter inside the Fort Revelin. The walls are up to 15 to 20 feet wide. This is the area now, part of the fort, that is the rehearsal area for the Dubrovnik Symphony Orchestra. And the other part of the fort also has to do with music, a more modern one though, and it is one of the best nightclubs in the city. So this is when you're younger, you want to let your hair down, you want to see the sunrise after you exit the club, and this will be inside. And that's the entrance via this way. So it goes up that way, you go through that door, and there's a big club inside. Thanks God for this big, powerful walls, because neighbors just living by there don't actually get to hear that thundering bass line at all. So it's a perfect spot to actually have the nightclub as such. And as we enter here, we'll find the same setup that we had in the entrance on the western side, and that's the identical kind of bridge, the mechanism that would have been lifting up the bridge, and the gates and the weights for lifting up the bridge there, the mechanism, and same setup that we would have had. And we've now exited the city. So this is the eastern gate. We're gonna find the lit area and switch the camera back on to me, and I'm ready. I hope you've enjoyed the tour, and I'm be ready to take some questions in a moment. I just want to find the area where we can get some lit up so that you actually get to see me as I switch the camera around across the street there. And try here. I think there's a lamp here and the view there. So back onto the entrance to the city. let's have a look. Just switching the camera. There we are.
Sure.
I
Michael,
hope you've
Michael,
enjoyed it.
that was terrific, a terrific tour. We've done some other tours that were, from people's home, from guides' homes and, PowerPoints, but this was really fantastic to get to see Dubrovnik and everything is going on there. It was great. I do have
Thank you,
a
Joel.
question.
Please.
What was at the residences in Dubrovnik? Do they rent or own, and how much are the people that live there? Do they rent? They rent their places, or do they own those?
Yes.
residences?
Yes, you will find a mixture of private ownership and rented properties, but I would have to say average Croatian believes in owning their property.
How
So
much?
for the most cases, well, depends which part of the country. Dubrovnik can be very forbidding to younger generations, but the trick is that older generations tend to maintain and leave to younger ones. So there's been a kind of a custom in this. It's an old city, and some customs are there that the elderly generations will leave to younger ones to keep and maintain the properties onwards. So in many cases, it may not be that great because it bore a whole class of people who rent out properties and do nothing else than living. And it's not so good. We're thinking that we become too, sometimes the objection towards the modern society of Dubrovnik is that they're too privileged and have too little to fight. It comes too easy to them in a sense, which is nice, but at the same time, it doesn't create, a progress in a sense. So it's a fine balance one has to find in that respect.
So how much does it people to own it? How much does it cost to buy one of those residences in town?
It depends, but a friend of mine has recently bought a penthouse apartment about 5 minutes walk away from the old town, and he's paid, let me see, he's paid 750 square feet, 195,000 euros, which is about $215,000.
I thought people were living in the town that you showed us, in the old town.
Oh yes, there are people living there, but you may remember I mentioned earlier in the tour, as a child, when my school started in 1975, 4,500 local people lived inside the walls. Now there's just below 1,000. They've really been driven out because we were too successful with tourism. And they found it very difficult to complain about your live music till 2 a.m. in August. But that's what we're about. That's what, tourism is our living. Dubrovnik, Croatia's 23% GDP is tourism. So you can't say, oh, turn the music down, because we sold the idea of you to come here and have sunbathing and have some culture and have some fun at night. This is what it's all about. So, but this is the same case has been happening in all major tourist spots around the world. Venice has experienced the same. The historical center is so great migration of locals leaving these hotspots because, it's just become too dense and too overcrowded to just walk down the street and go do your shopping in peace. It became frustrating. I had local people, elderly, sometimes shout at me because I have 25 people in a group behind me. And what can I do? This is my job. They all have the headphones, and I don't have to shout, but who have that little flag and they go behind me. I'm one of the 50 guides with such groups at the same time. And sometimes I understand them. It's not easy. I pretend not to hear them, but sometimes they're angry and they shout at you. But what can you do? So the trend was for a lot of people to just migrate, and they did get paid well. They got about, $800-900 a square foot. They can buy 2 houses outside for the price of one here. And then they can have a garage, and, they can be near the local supermarket and not have any noise at night. So, that's what happened in the last 20 years in the city.
Okay. Anybody else have any questions they want to ask Michael? Dave, you can unmute. Unmute yourself.
You need to have a computer.
I don't.
Well, one thing I'd
Yeah.
like to mention, if you come to the Croatia, at the moment, our local currency is called kuna. You get about 6.5 kunas to $1, but from 2023, Croatia is a full member of the European Union for about 6 years now. And from 2023, we are Eurozone, so our currency is going to be only Euro.
How did the Republic end?
Republic, that's a great question, and I'm glad you asked it. The Republic was stuck between a great conflict of Russians and French. And the Republic wanted to maintain its neutrality and asked Napoleon, when he was heading east, not to use any part of its territory in movement of his forces. But he did, without asking the Republic. It was tiny anyway. It was a major, global military power. And he never asked. And the Russians decided that we are now in bed with Napoleon, having been reported to that Napoleon's forces are using tracts of land of Dubrovnik, and the Russians attacked. Then the French, we let the French in. We were closer culturally to French in many ways than to Russians, as Catholics and otherwise. And we were bombarded by the Russians, we let the Napoleon's forces into the city and into the walls ultimately. And in 1806, Napoleon brings a decree that the Republic is no more. And Napoleon is here for 5 years. He's driven out by the British Navy and Austro-Hungarian infantry. And then we fall under the Croatian Austro-Hungarian Empire until the end of the First World War.
Wow, a lot of history.
Because of the collapse, you have a unique situation that all of the Balkan Peninsula is divided between Austro-Hungarian Empire and Ottoman Empire, with the exception of Dubrovnik, who managed to keep independent for all those centuries. And at the end of the First World War, there was a collapse of both empires that actually ran half and half. And now you had the void. And these tiny nations like Slovenians, Croats, Montenegrins, they all feel weak and vulnerable by themselves. So idea was born to unite these nations, regardless of deep maybe divisions and differences from a religious perspective. But one thing they had in common was that they had Slavic background. So a country called Yugoslavia was born after the First World War as a union of Southern Slavs. Yugo means South, Slavs, you got the name, Yugoslavia, South Slavs, as a union, believing that together they can advance their own interests rather than being dominated and taxed and used by foreign powers. It was an attempt to a marriage which ended in a bloodshed ultimately in 1991, because they never kind of got their internal house in order and never kind of, made a, Tito kind of kept it together. And I grew up in a childhood during Tito's era. I saw him live when I was 8. It was very exciting. He was a marshal and a legend of the Second World War. But when he died in 1980, the old national tensions surfaced and culminated in most unfortunate way in the early 90s.
Thank you.
Okay.
You're welcome.
Where does Djokovic live? Where did he grow up?
Who's that? Djokovic.
Yeah,
Novak, the tennis player. He's
the tennis
from
player.
Serbia. He's from Serbia. We had Goran Ivanišević, he's Croat, from Split, just like Tony Kukoc.
Oh, sorry.
You remember Ivanišević won the Wimbledon? But we
Yeah.
love Novak. He's a hero. He's loved in Croatia as well as Serbia.
Huh.